Welcome to the Paddle and Portage podcast. Sitting here in the Paddle and Portage studios with Joe Fredericks, Freddie Fresh, with a story that came out of the blue that I authentically know nothing about. What's all over that notebook you got in your hands? What's happening?
I got documents here. I got intel. I got things of significance in terms of the boundary waters, the recently passed away former President Jimmy Carter, some lakes in the BWCA, and a potential petition that could rename a lake in the boundary waters.
Where do we start?
Well, we start with ice fishing. How about that?
That sounds about right.
I only say that because I was getting ready to go on the trout opener, actually. This occurred like right around New Year's, all of this, which is the trout opener, January 1, for lakes entirely.
We were out there together.
Spectacular. Cold. So this email comes in to Paddle and Portage, and it's from a gentleman named Robert Barrett. And we had actually communicated, I learned, or after discussing some of this with Robert, about when Brady fell through the ice last year, episode 2, the podcast.
Brady Powers' near-death brush.
Up on Rose Lake. Robert is the one who, remember there was a group who wanted a sled and they were going to maybe pull Brady out in the sled? Yeah. Remember that part of the story? That's Robert. He was fishing on Rose with his friends that day.
Robert was there.
Yeah, and had emailed after, said I heard the episode and, we were that group. So that was like last January in that time frame, right?
Right. So Robert comes back into the orbit.
Exactly. And says, I was skiing the other day up the Gunflint, Golden Eagle trails, where you've been skiing.
I love those trails at Golden Eagle.
And says, I had an idea. President Carter passed away December 29th. And we've got these two lakes right near each other on the Gunflint, Caribou lakes that share the same name. One right by Poplar, one by Clearwater in that area. And I've always kind of had a hard time with that, trying to tell my friends which caribou I'm at. The fishing's good on this caribou. Well, which caribou is it? It's got this confusing thing. And to honor President Carter and his connections to the boundary waters, including signing the 1978 legislation, that the BWCA Wilderness Act, what if we change one of those lake names? How do we do it? What's going on? What do you think about that idea, Joe?
Like he was running it by you.
Yes. I said, come down to the studio. Let's meet at the headquarters.
Of course.
So I had a chance to sit down with Robert and let's pick it up right there. Well, joining us now on the podcast and here at the Paddle and Portage headquarters in Grand Marais is Robert Barrett. Robert owns some property in Cook County, spends part of the year at the very least up here. Robert, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I was traveling on the Gunflint Trail with my wife, Anna. We were coming back from Golden Eagle, and I just had this idea that kind of just struck me, with the passing of Jimmy Carter recently. Would it make sense to maybe honor him by renaming one of the lakes in the boundary waters in his honor? So I did a search on Lake Finder just first to just check, are there any Carter lakes in the boundary waters? And the answer to that is no. And then I was starting to think about, a couple of the lakes that are on the Gunflint Trail, actually two very beautiful lakes that I've camped on with my family, the two different Caribou lakes, the Caribou, kind of the eastern lake off of Clearwater, and then the other Caribou lake off of Liz and kind of the Poplar chain of lakes. And both those lakes are great. They're great fishing lakes, but it is a little bit confusing because when I do kind of describe those adventures to people, I feel like I always have to clarify and say, it's the eastern Caribou or the western Caribou. So I was kind of thinking, it might make sense to maybe rename one of those Caribou lakes Jimmy Carter. So I kind of researched the issue, changing a lake name in Minnesota. It can be done, and it has been done, recently, most kind of famously in the Twin Cities with the renaming of Lake Calhoun.
So for this lake,
Yeah.
you just said Jimmy Carter, but you want to call it Carter Lake, right?
I think from a simplicity perspective, Carter Lake makes sense. But I think that's something to explore. I mean, maybe you do want to make it more obvious that it is, in honor of Jimmy Carter, versus just calling it Carter Lake. So
I see.
I think that's something to explore and just think about. And this is a very, initial kind of just, thought process. It's a thought exercise really at this point. But I thought at least explore the issue. And I kind of threw it over to Joe in an email, and it sounded like it was something that he wanted to talk about. So here I am. And
and I appreciate you coming down. So you sent me this email to my Paddle and Portage email account, and that gets you share with me what you just shared now on the podcast about this idea that there's two Caribou lakes, and those lakes are pretty close to each other, like East Bearskin, Clearwater area. It's kind of sandwiched in there. It's just above Moon and south of Clearwater, this east Caribou Lake. And then that other one that you're talking about Poplar, is a very, very popular lake in the summer, certainly for easy access off of Liz and Poplar there, and you can get at it from a few different directions. So those lakes are well-known lakes near the Gunflint Trail. This isn't like some far-flung, tucked away in the far reaches of Little Sag or something. Like, these are accessible lakes with a lot of campsites on them. So to be like Caribou, well, which Caribou is it? I mean, I've had that discussion dozens of times over the years that I've been up here. So there's some context, a reason for renaming one of those lakes on its own. Like
regardless,
that,
right,
like
exactly.
That alone is a reason. So we got that. And then the context of President Carter and why I think you were talking about him or thinking about him, in addition to the fact that he passed away on December 29th, was the significance of President Carter and his administration to the Boundary Waters and the signing of the BWCA Wilderness Act in 1978. So it's not like there's some disconnect between all of these things that you were pondering that day, that you were skiing up the Gunflint. Is that when you had these thoughts?
So skiing at Golden Eagle. And so I kind of researched it, with the Boundary Waters Canoe Wilderness Act of 1978. It was the formal designation of the Boundary Waters. And, in addition to that 1964 act, the main purpose of this one was to further protect and enhance the lakes and waterways of the BWCA. It created a formal management process of the area, and it placed further restrictions on logging, mining, and kind of motorized vehicle use within the BWCA. So it was an important step, and it really kind of finalized what the Boundary Waters is today. And that's why I think, with Jimmy Carter signing that law in 1978, I think there is a reason to kind of honor him with at least, some lake somewhere in the Boundary Waters. And that's why I kind of had this, initial conversation with Joe.
All right. So there's a process to changing a lake name in Minnesota, and that starts actually at the local level here with the Cook County Board of Commissioners. And what an individual such as Robert or somebody else would need to do is collect a petition, start a petition, and get it signed by at least 15 registered voters in Cook County. Then you take that and you request a public hearing, and the Board of Commissioners here in Cook County would either support that or not. I've asked Ann Sullivan, who is the current board chair, until they have that meeting to decide who the next board chair is. Could be Ann. Nonetheless, I reached out to Ann to gauge her interest in that. We'll wait to say that the board holds this public hearing, and then they say, yeah, you know what, we do want to honor President Carter, and we're open to changing one of these names of the Caribou Lakes. Then it goes to the DNR, the state level, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and the commissioner weighs in. I'm sure there's some other people at the DNR that have input on that. And then it passes to what's known as the U.S. Board of Geographic Names. It's a federal entity, so it goes to the federal level after that. And there is some precedent for this, as you said, down in the Twin Cities, with Calhoun and Bde-Maka, that name change of that very, very popular lake right in the heart of Minneapolis. And then in Lake County, there's another more recent example as well of a name that was changed. We don't need to say the names of those lakes, but a former NFL football team in Washington had that name as well, and so that was changed in Lake County in Superior National Forest. and some other lakes toward the end of the Gunflint Trail. So there is like history to this. This has happened in Minnesota in very modern times. This isn't like in the past they've changed lake names. I could see that some of the outfitters, let's say Bearskin or Rockwood, or some of the people that serve like Poplar Lake or East Bearskin, Clearwater outfitters, those areas, being like, yeah, we support this, but we've got a lot of maps and our websites are built and it says Caribou Lake. So there would be some adjustment, but I mean, I think that people would generally be supportive of this. Have you done a litmus test beyond Paddle and Portage on this?
I have not, but
Okay.
I can definitely see where there could be some initial pain, but I think there is a long-term gain to just providing clarity too. So you might have to go through something in the short term with maps and maybe websites, but long term, I think it does make sense because, looking at those two lakes, they're about 8 miles apart based on GPS coordinates. So they're really close. And like you said earlier, they're very popular. People want to be on those lakes. They're usually pretty busy almost every summer. There are outfitters that definitely provide canoes and other gear so that people can take trips on both those lakes. So I think long term, the clarity does matter.
So you made this reference that, or what I think I'm hearing from you is the one you would want to see change of these two Caribou lakes in particular that we're talking about inside the wilderness near the Gunflint, of the one near Poplar south of there through Liz, like between the two, because that's going to be a question. Well, which one do we change and how do we decide that? I mean, what are you feeling about those scenarios?
Yeah. And, as I previously mentioned, these are both really fantastic lakes that I've camped on with my kids. And, they're just great lakes, and they're great lakes for jumping further into the boundary waters, whether you're going over, to Johnson Falls or whether you're going down to Gaskin. These are really fantastic lakes. But just kind of, and this is more of a feel. It's not really based on any data or facts, but just kind of a feel. It feels like the Caribou that's on the west side should be renamed Carter Lake.
The one by Poplar.
The one by Poplar. The one that's coming off of Liz. I think that one just, to me, intuitively just kind of feels more like a Carter Lake. But again, this is just 100% feel. It's not fully vetted or based on any facts specifically around the lake itself, but just it feels a little bit more like a Carter Lake.
Yeah, because it's probably going to be an important thing, and you're going to need to decide that before you start the petition, or whoever starts the petition, right? Is that which lake is it that we're actually renaming? We can't just say, well, there's two, let's rename one. Like, we're probably going to need to be specific about that. So that's part of this, and maybe the public or whomever, as this starts to be shared and discussed, can weigh in on that, or we can ask the people on Poplar and East Bearskin, Clearwater communities, but what do you all think about this? This is your neighborhood up in here, or put it on some of the forums somewhere, or get some input on that, I guess.
I think that's a really important point, and I'm not set on either. So I think if there's a stronger public feel on one of the two lakes being renamed, I think I'm certainly amendable and would go with that.
One interesting point, you mentioned Gaskin Lake, that Vice President Mondale was flown into that lake. Have you ever heard that story?
I have not.
Back in the day, there's a campsite on Gaskin that some of the outfitters still refer to as the Mondale site, because they the Forest Service or somebody sort of spruced it up a bit, to say, hey, come check this place out. So it's like a 5-star site on Gaskin that Mondale came in and camped on, and that is closer to the Caribou by Poplar Lake that you're talking about, the West Caribou. So there's that pull into the story too, as far as which of the Caribou should be renamed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't know that story.
Hey podcast listeners, it's Claire and Dan Shirley from Sawbill Canoe Outfitters. It's January, which is actually a big month for the Boundary Waters. While very few people visit in January, it does really kick off the planning season for the coming summer.
That's right. Boundary Waters permit reservations go live on January 28th on recreation.gov. And reservations for canoes went live on sawbill.com on January 1st. Feel free to submit a reservation to us anytime. No need to book your permit first. If you don't end up with your first choice of a permit, we can easily adjust your reservation, and we have a no penalty cancellation policy up until 5 days before the start of your trip. So it's pretty low risk to book now.
But don't worry if you don't have plans in place yet. We rarely fully book up on our canoes, and there will be many, many desirable permits available after go live day. So there's plenty of time to make plans farther down the road. Feel free to call us or email us at any time with your planning questions. Connecting with Sawbill customers is really our favorite part of the job.
Speaking of Sawbill.com, our refurbished canoe sale is in full swing, so hop on our website and check those out. If you buy one, we are happy to store it for you indoors until your next trip this summer.
And don't forget, we're also accepting applications for new crew members for this coming summer. Former crew often tell us that a summer working at Sawbill was the best time ever. We always have a good mix of returning veterans and new crew alike, so drop us a line if you'd like to learn more about it.
Okay, that was a lot. Time to get back to enjoying the quiet, snow-covered woods.
We're talking right now just about those lakes in the BWCA Wilderness on the Gunflint. There's also this other Caribou Lake in Cook County.
That's right.
Up the Caribou Trail, of
Right.
course, where, very, very popular, and people live on that lake. It's a beautiful lake up the Caribou. So we've got at least three for sure, lakes in Cook County named Caribou Lake. So maybe we can add that in as another sort of ingredient into the recipe of why this should be at least considered. So the process of starting the petition, as we said at the top, you own property in Cook County, east of Grand Marais a ways, but you are a resident of the Twin Cities area, so you aren't a registered voter in Cook County, which means you couldn't sign your own petition potentially.
That's exactly right. So that's part of why, even as an idea, I can't further explore this on my own. I would need, voters, residents of Cook County to really initiate the process and get it started if people actually believe it's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We are wondering, or I'm wondering at the very least, about starting the petition, though. Just because you can't sign it, does that preclude or exclude you from starting the petition?
That's a great question. I don't fully know that, but I think it does probably make the most sense just to have someone in the county probably start it. I mean, I'm certainly open to doing that, but there's probably a little bit more oomph if it is a registered voter within the county, just so that there's no legality or complications, in the future on, well, who started this?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, if somebody wants to start this, should they get in contact with you? Would you assist them, or what do you see as next steps here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would certainly be willing to help explore it and make contacts to commissioners or other people, but that's something I haven't really fully vetted on my own. So that'd be something that I'd want to further consider. But I will add just, one additional point, in terms of the process. Something that was kind of interesting in my own research was, the commissioners are kind of discouraged from renaming lakes of people that are currently alive. So this actually is an opportunity with the passing of Jimmy Carter to kind of explore this maybe for the first time and maybe memorialize him now.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, fascinating. And let's add some context to your engagement with the Boundary Waters and time here on the North Shore in Cook County, because even though you're not a registered voter here, you have obviously a passion for the Boundary Waters. You walked into the office here today and you showed me a picture of some, for better or worse, smallmouth bass that you caught ice fishing on the opener this year on January 1. So you get out there. I mean, you were telling me, you've camped on both these Caribou lakes that we're talking about. You do multiple trips into the BWCA every year. So tell us a little more about the Boundary Waters and what it means to you.
Yeah. So my wife and I started coming up, to the North Shore probably in the mid 2000s. Interestingly, my first experience in the Boundary Waters is actually hiking Eagle Mountain, which I would think for most people is probably not their first experience in the Boundary Waters.
The summit of the highest point of elevation.
Exactly. So that was my first time in the Boundary Waters. And then since then, I've been coming up here. I would say, we purchased our place in 2020. So I think in terms of coming into the Boundary Waters a lot, I would say over the last 4, now maybe 5 years, coming up here and then spending time with, friends and then my immediate family, doing camping trips, but also just doing day trips, and mostly kind of focused on the Gunflint side of the Boundary Waters, maybe a little bit kind of along the, the Tofty side as well, through Brule or Sawbill or some of those as well. But really enjoy the Boundary Waters, try to get out there, 3 or 4 trips, overnight trips a year. And then, like I mentioned, a bunch of day trips.
Mm-hmm. And what are you doing out there? Fishing? What draws you there?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of the classic kind of Boundary Waters type experiences of, with our kids. It's kind of the full slate of having campfires, doing swimming, doing fishing, doing waterfalls, doing hikes. We definitely, especially in the Vento unit, we like hiking. So that's a great area of the Boundary Waters to get out on the Border Route Trail or some of these other things, whether it's the Clearwater Palisade or going over to Johnson Falls. Some of these are really high-end Boundary Waters experiences, and that's kind of what we mostly do with our family.
All right. I add some of that context to, even though you can't start this petition, or maybe it seems like you're a little reluctant to start the petition because you can't sign it, is that you have some connections here, and your family's involved in the community here in Grand Marais and Cook County, that you're not just, sort of one of those Twin Cities tourist type that don't land too well when it gets to local politics and that type of stuff in terms of making requests of the county, that you and your family are involved in things here.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah, and I think my wife and kids, they spend a lot of time here. I work remote, so as much as I can come up and enjoy this wonderful area, I do so. But my wife and kids, especially in the summertime, they are up here quite a bit.
All right. Well, this seems like a noble idea. Sometimes these things might stall out a bit if there's nobody that sort of takes the action. And so now you've got this idea. Who's going to do it? That's the next piece of this equation, I think. I know that Chris, the director of the Friends of the Boundary Waters organization, Friends of the BWCA, that he's been talking a lot with the media about President Carter, the significance of the administration. Communicating with an organization like the Friends might be a starting point to drum up support and get people interested in this idea. Of course, we're doing that here on the podcast today, too, that there are channels to sort of keep this moving forward. In other words, we'll just see what happens next, Robert. But I think it's a cool idea that you had basically on the edge of the wilderness and skiing up at Golden Eagle, like right near the Gunflint Trail, right near East Caribou Lake, as we're calling it in our discussion, in that area at the very least, that this seems to be one of those scripts that just got some framework to it.
Yeah, and I think the timing right now is important too. And I just want to echo kind of what you said. Friends of the Boundary Waters, not podcast, but just they had a program on WCCO, and there's that video that you can watch on YouTube. So I would encourage people just go and see that, because there's good context around Jimmy Carter and his legacy around the Boundary Waters as well.
Also loved hearing those stories about your passion for this place, the Boundary Waters. I think it's cool that you have these connections and shared some of your stories with us today too. So thank you, Robert. We'll keep our listeners informed, the paddling community. We'll see what comes next. We'll maybe engage, as I said, with the county board and just take it one step at a time. But we're talking with Robert Barrett, owns some property here in Cook County, has this idea to change one of the 2 Caribou lakes inside the BWCA near the Gunflint Trail to Carter Lake, or something close to that, to honor the late President Jimmy Carter, who died December 29th, 2024. Robert, appreciate you coming down here.
Thank you.
Joe Fredericks, does it seem realistic that we may be posting or seeing a petition come out of this, maybe at paddleandportage.com?
I think it's going to be very interesting to see what comes next. I mean, as we heard from Robert, just his feeling that the petition should originate from a registered voter in Cook County. Robert's not trying to just pass off this idea. He wants to be part of the process. But if you, listening, live in Cook County, you're a registered voter in Cook County, and you're interested in this, get a hold of me. I'd be happy to connect you with Robert or facilitate this discussion in whatever way seems reasonable. Certainly, I want to follow along the journey here. But if you are interested in this and you would like to start this petition, which is a very, very easy thing to do, probably online. You can do a paper document, whatever. We'll help you figure that out. Give me a call. Shoot me an email, joe@paddleandportage.com. Stop by the office here in Grand Marais. block up from Bucks right here in the Lucari building. Like, swing by, get a hold of us if you're interested in this.
I'm so curious with ideas like this that sort of incept on the ski trail or out on the lakes. Is this going to be a moment where that starts the change? Or is this going to be a forgotten idea that we recall around a campfire at some later date? Not only will time tell, but you, the listener, your response will tell the story.
Indeed, yes. So we'll just see what happens next. We'll certainly keep you informed here on the podcast, maybe just periodic updates on other episodes, or we'll do a follow-up track here, have Robert back down. It sort of depends on what happens next. Robert was really a great guy to talk with me, not just about this. We ended up looking at the map here on the wall of the Boundary Waters and talking about routes and trips that he does with his kids. And you think this is a good idea to do this route up to Winchell with the kids? Should we come from Brule or Poplar? You know, all the stuff you talk about looking at the map and talking some fishing and stuff too. So really passionate person when it comes to the Boundary Waters, and just cool person to talk with on a beautiful winter's day. And we'll see what happens. Appreciated him coming down and reaching out to us.
Thank you, Robert, for your time and energy. Thank you to you, our listeners. Thanks to our sponsors. We'll see you again soon.